Thank you, Brad. Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Couple of quick things. As Chris said, you'll find us around. We'll probably be hanging out at the back of the room, especially for developers. Speaking from mine and Gary's standpoint. Any SDK questions, product level questions? After I speak for a few minutes, Gary's actually going to go through and show you how to create an app with geofencing and later in the day also with beacons. Actually, we might do both in the morning. So just to show you how easy it is to put in the SDK, and in a few minutes, you'll be able to get an app up and running with geofencing and proximity. So if you want to try that, anytime in the day, if you have questions or any other use cases you have in mind and how to implement, so we'll be around and happy to answer any questions. So essentially, Brian ran through this slide, and I'm actually going to go in and just speak a little bit about each of the features and give a couple of distinguishing points and speak from a product standpoint. So the platform itself, we'll look at it as if, there's the SDK portion of it, which is the SDK that goes into your app that's on users' devices. And there's the backend server component, which is the Gimbal manager. You can manage your beacons, create geofences, set up messages, and we're essentially also, focusing on allowing developers to do a lot of things server-side. Because, hey, everyone knows, you can submit an app to the store. It's not feasible to make a change every other day. I'm like, hey, I'm going to change a message, or I'm going to now activate new beacons. So you can't keep pushing out app updates and waiting a few days for it to go live. So essentially, the focus is also to allow developers to do a lot of things on the fly. Just essentially put the right hooks in the app. Hey, once it goes to the store, you can do all the things on the back end without actually making any changes to the app. In terms of the SDK itself, we have our geofencing feature. I'm not going to go and teach you what geofencing is. I assume everyone has an idea of what geofencing is. A couple of distinguishing factors is Gimbal allows you to create radial and polygonal fences. So, hey, everything is not a circle. So shopping mall or any other area, you can create a radial or polygonal fence. You can do it by logging into the Gimbal manager, which you'll see shortly. Or we also have REST APIs. Which, hey, if you had an existing management platform or you wanted to just make API, do everything programmatically, we have REST APIs to do all of that. Another thing which Brian touched upon is, you have some OS level limitations on the number of geofences you can manage or monitor for, number of regions you can monitor for. The SDK takes care of that limit for you, so you can essentially have an unlimited number of fences. The SDK will take care of, hey, which fences it needs to monitor for a particular user. We have our proximity beacons. Most of you, if not all, would have at least got your hands off. This is our Series 10 beacons, simple coin cell battery. Depending on the use cases, hey, these also have been used a lot. Battery runs about 3 to 4 months in default range. That's our Series 20 beacons. So this is the one we most commonly deploy in commercial environments, retail stores, stadiums, sports venues. Battery life in default config, which is transmitting 10 times a second, runs about 12 to 14 months. So, typically if you're looking at, hey, what kind of maintenance is my customer looking at? Hey, you're changing 4AA batteries once a year. So yeah, it comes with 4AA batteries. It ships with 4AA batteries. So at the most, in terms of maintenance, you're looking at changing batteries once a year. Also, the system actually sends you an alert whenever the battery life changes from, hey, it's full, it's gone to medium, it's gone to low. So you'll know, the system will send you an alert, so you'll know that, hey, I have a month to change batteries on this. So it's not like, hey, my beacon just went silent, I don't know what's going on. So you'll get an email, which helps with a lot with, hey, operations folks we speak to is, hey, how do I maintain this beacons I've deployed all across my venue? Proximity exchange. So the way we look at that is, sure, you've heard of the common use cases where show a coupon or send a message to a user. But we look at it as an exchange for both ways. Even for your customers, you getting valuable data within indoor spaces or within your store, within a venue. You're getting to learn more about your users, and so you can actually do some more meaningful messaging. And hey, after a while, sure, you're getting a coupon, you're getting a message, but you can do some more cool interactive stuff with your users, which you're not previously able to do. Notifications. We call it the communicate. Within Gimbal, so that's essentially the component which allows you to program messages. So, hey, when someone arrives into arrives at a geofence or leaves a certain area, show them a message. When someone comes near a beacon, show them a message. In terms of the platform, essentially we look at geofencing and we call it, hey, macro location or micro location. We look at it as one whole piece, in terms of a use case, I would say, hey, someone comes into New York City, your app could start the experience that, hey, welcome to New York City, there's an event going on, and then when someone walks in through the front door, you can show them a message, they're in the space. So essentially, the whole experience, we look at it as a single experience. It's not like, hey, you're doing geofencing and now you're doing beacons, and both just look completely separate aspects of an app. The Gimbal Manager is, I touched upon, that's the backend management portal we have, and you'll look at it shortly. Essentially, you'll set up your messages. You can set up messages to activate at a certain time. You can set up messages to, hey, only send messages to people who are in this geofence. So, hey, event is going on. You could send an instant push to only people who are in that event. So, hey, if I am sitting on the couch at home, I don't want that message even though I have the app because this is not relevant to me. You can set up messages when someone comes near a beacon. In the SDK, you're able to also tell the SDK, I only want to get a call back if someone is within 1 feet or 3 feet of the beacon, or I want to know when someone is 100 feet away. I just want to know they entered the space. So you can do those things also. So you can control when your app triggers things. And so we have analytics. Hey, big deal, data. We have useful analytics, so you get to see how many unique people saw your beacon. What's the average? We call it dwell time. What's the average dwell time they were around a beacon? What's the average dwell time they were inside a geofence? So a whole variety of use cases. I'm not going to go into each of them, but just wanted to at least call out high level. Privacy and security, Brian touched upon it. Big priority for us. We enforce all our developers. When you do an app, make users opt in. So it's not like users downloaded an app, they got a generic OS pop up, and now something's running in the background. We actually enforce our developers to show custom opt-in screens. So users actually know, OK, hey, this is what the app is offering, and then allow users that control to opt in rather than having them opt out because something is running by default. And also, hey, we also enforce our developers to have settings so at any time users can say, hey, I'm going to disable this right now because, hey, maybe I only wanted this when I walk into a certain space, and then when I'm not in the space and I'm doing other things, I don't necessarily need my app to do these things. So we do ask developers to allow those controls in the hand of the user. Also, another aspect I would like to say is in terms of security also, hey, all the data on Gimbal side is anonymized. So essentially, we look at it as users have a relationship with the apps. You control that data. You have access to your users' information. We are essentially a technology enabler. We are making the app location, or whatever you want to call it, in micro location spaces or macro location spaces. So we don't have any PII data for all your users. You still own that data. So that was essentially all the high-level points. I don't want to take up too much time. Gary Dam, he's actually a software lead. He's actually going to walk through our quick start guide, which you'll see on the website, and you can actually give it a try while you're here today. And he's going to actually create an app which is going to use our geofences, use our beacons, and so you'll also get a sense of, hey, how easy it is or what are the steps to go do that. So with that, I'd like to ask Gary to come present that. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me all right here? Okay. Yeah. Morning. My name's Gary Dam. I am the software lead for Gimbal, and I've been involved with this project for the past 4 years, doing engineering on the geofencing part of the product, as well as the beacons, the software side of the platform. I'm not a hardware guy. We have other guys on the team that are expertise in that area. What I'm going to do this morning, rather than do a presentation, is I'm going to walk through our quick start guides that are publicly available on the internet and go through our what we call the manager portal, which is how we manage the back-end data that the Gimbal SDK is using in your applications, and build an app real quick so you can kind of see how it all comes together. So it's because you're going to see warts and all. I mean, we're going to go through the actual development process. And the point of it is, I saw a lot of development hands go up, so you guys will appreciate what it takes to actually build an application. You're going to hear from all kinds of partners today about very interesting, compelling applications that they've already built that are using it. And for the folks here that aren't developers, you'll see what it takes for the back-end management of the system, how you'll be able to add geofences, messaging, and beacons without actually having to redeploy or upgrade your application. So let me get started with that. So I'm going to start out here at the sign-in page for the Gimbal Manager. Now, I'll be going slow enough here that if you wanted to actually follow along, I see some of you have laptops, what you would do is you'd come here to manager.gimbal.com or go to gimbal.com and click on the developer resources in the upper right, and you could sign up right here. Once you've signed up, you will wind up in the same sign-in area that you see me in right here. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my account. And first thing that we're going to want to do, and I'll jump back and forth between this manager portal, the document that we'll have you follow, and Xcode, which is where we're going to build the actual application. So the first thing you're going to want to do is download the SDK. And we're talking about the iOS SDK here. So go ahead and click on it, download it to wherever you like. I've already downloaded this. What you're going to end up with is a zip file that you see in my directory here. And I've already downloaded it and expanded it so we don't have any network issues. Once you expand that folder, what you'll see is that the documentation that's also on the web, the documentation for the version of the SDK that you have is also bundled inside of there. So you can open that up and follow along right from the SDK documentation. When you hit the index page, you're going to wind up here at the overview. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through three separate quick starts. One is actually just enabling Gimbal in an Xcode application or an iOS application and just getting it registered. And then there's two other quick starts which are much shorter that will turn on geofencing and another one that will enable beacons. And I'll try to get through that as quick as possible, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions. And if not, you'll notice that Sid and I and a couple other folks in the back of the room have our uniform shirts on, and we're going to be here all day, so we'll be around to answer any questions that you have, anything that's not clear, anything that I don't cover. So let's get started on this initial quick start, which is going to get the application enabled. First thing, which we already covered, is creating your developer account. The next thing is creating your iOS application. We're going to do this in Xcode. This is the environment, the minimal environment we're going to want you to have. At this point, you're probably on Xcode 6. I'm going to be using an iOS 8 device, an iPhone 5S, but all the following would work for this tutorial as well. And then you also need a valid Apple developer account so that you can get your provisioning profiles to run code on the device. Okay, so let's launch Xcode. The most painful part here is going to be pulling all the libraries in that we need. I'm going to create a single view application. What you're going to see is I'm not going to actually show the display on the phone at all, and I'm going to use the console. So I'm going to have the phone logging to the console so you can just follow along in the console and Xcode and what's going on in the app. I'm not going to create a UI. You wouldn't want to sit around and try to watch me do that. Okay, so we have an application. We're going to set our deployment, leave our deployment target at 8 because my phone's already on 8. We support back to 6 for the beacons, and we support back to 4 for the geofences, but I think we're already over 50% of devices are on iOS 8 now, so we should be safe there. Let's jump back into the document. The next step is to pull in the iOS frameworks that we're going to be using. So we use Bluetooth, obviously. We use location. We use core data to persist some data on the device. We use libz to do some compression within the SDK. We use MapKit for some of our debugging and settings screens that use maps. And then we use security for some encryption. So we're going to pull the libraries into Xcode as quickly as possible. Okay, so Bluetooth. core location. Data. libz. Again, this is a compression library. Security for encryption. And mapkit. Okay, so we have 6 here. These are iOS frameworks. We're going to clean up a little bit over here. We'll create a frameworks group so we're not staring at these the whole time. Let's move them in there. Okay. Okay, I'm jumping back to the document again. Again, I'm going to be jumping back and forth quite a bit, so hope you're following. This is the document, Xcode, and then the other tab we're going to be in is the actual manager, the Gimbal manager. Okay, so here are the actual Gimbal frameworks. It's broken into pieces, so we're going to be pulling in 5 frameworks for Gimbal. The next version of the software, we've combined it into one single framework. The project, a little bit of history real quick on the project. We came out of Qualcomm, as Brian mentioned, and actually within Qualcomm, the geofencing and the proximity were 2 separate projects that eventually were integrated together. We're still working on kind of a seamless integration to make it much quicker to do the development with the product under the hood. The beta for that is actually available. We're not going to go through that. We'd rather not have people, I'd rather show you the warts and what you could use right now to put into production. The beta is still beta. We'd rather not have people using it in production, but we'd love to have you take a look at it and see how much easier it is to use. The instructions for beta are this. You know what? Are you going to be here this afternoon? I'm going to try to get through everything now for version 1, and then I'll try to hit on the beta, which again is publicly available. So at 1 o'clock, when we have another slot, I'll try to hit that and go through it quicker and actually show you how to build the same app, but in the beta. And you should see it's much less code, which is always nice, right? I'm back in the SDK that I downloaded, and I'm going to grab the frameworks that I want. We have common, we have a core, we have a location. We're not going to use profiling right now, so I'm going to skip that. And network services. I'm going to just drag these in. If you guys have worked in Xcode before, dragging these in works better for some reason than it does to select them like I did the iOS libraries. Find that, and I'll show you this in a second, it pulls the right target more consistently. If you select them with the selector for some reason, sometimes it doesn't pick the proper target for you. And part of the document will ask you to confirm this. But if you click on one of your frameworks, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the target membership of your frameworks. And what you want to do is verify that your class for your application, that the framework's in that target membership. It'll cause heartache sometimes because you won't figure out why your compiler can't find your frameworks. So at this point, we have everything in here that we need. And again, that was, I think, the most painful part of what we're going to do today. So let's jump back to the document and make sure that I'm not missing anything. We verify the target membership, like I said. The deployment target version, again, I'm going to leave it on 8. We support back to, we'll just call it 6 because we're doing proximity, so we don't support anything before 6 on proximity. The next thing we need to do is jump back into the Gimbal Manager application and create in there what we call application. This will tie the server to your instance of the app that you're running and identify it on our server. So we're going to create an app, create a new application for iOS. You have to put the actual bundle identifier that you're using in here. I've walked through this before, so no, it's actually so smart that it just knows what I called it. And create this application. And then what you're going to end up with here, and we're going to come back and have to grab these at some point, a Gimbal API key that is for the frameworks that are responsible for the geolocation and the communications in the app. And then there's some other credentials down here that are used for the proximity piece. Right now, they're 2 separate sets of credentials that you're going to have to set up, and you'll see that. Okay, so let's jump back to the document now that our app is created. Okay, so for geofencing, we're going to set up a P list that's going to identify the production API key, which just got created in the manager. So we'll go back into Xcode. We'll add a P list. And we'll specify our production API key in the P list. Okay. So at this point, as the value, jump back to the manager. And the production API key in the application that we just created is this Gimbal API key. So copy that, paste that in, save that. We're jumping again back to the document. We're going to make sure we didn't forget anything. Okay, so now we're going to actually get to some code. First thing we're going to do is what we call enable. I'm going to run everything out of the app delegate within the app. Again, you don't want to see me trying to create UI in here, so I'm going to spare you that. The sample applications that are in that SDK, there's two of them. There's one related to geofencing, one related to proximity, and they both have UI and make it much nicer for you to actually walk around with the device and see this working. But for the sake of time here, I'm going to spare you trying to do that. So this is enabling the actual core of Gimbal, this next step here. And we're going to put that into where we did finish launching our application. So what this is going to do is it's going to read from that properties file that we just created, the API key. It's going to register this instance of the application with the server. And then it's going to tell us in our log in the console whether it was enabled or whether it failed. So at this point, it's not very interesting, so I'm not going to run it just yet. What I'm going to do now instead is go to the next quick start, which you'll see real quickly here is much shorter. So this is just, now we're going to put a geofence into the system. And so when we do start the app, we'll see the geofence trigger, assuming location services isn't having any issues in this building. And if it is, we'll default to beacons, which is what they're for. So we're going to add geofencing to the application. The first thing that we need to do is actually go back into the manager and create the geofence that we want. So you wind up back in Gimbal's management console. There's a tab for geofences, and we're going to add one. I'll call us out real quick while we're here, but we'll be here to answer more questions about it. If you, for instance, were building an app and you wanted all the college campuses in the U.S., rather than you going and creating however many of those there are, we do provide public geofences for certain public venues and spaces, and you can import those into the manager here. Again, we're around to answer more detailed questions on that later. So for now, let's just create one at the space where we are, which is Helen Mills event space. Let's make the radius big because I don't know how good location services is here. So we'll do 0.5 kilometer. Helen Mills. Okay, so it found the address. Let's see, does that look right? 26th and 7th. That looks good. Let's create that. Okay, so this geofence exists on the manager now. So we're going to jump back to the app. Or actually, I'm sorry, we're going to jump back to the document. We're going to jump back to the document and just start copying some more code. What we're going to put in here next is what we call the place connector. This is the piece that's going to provide the delegate, which is going to call you back in your application when we arrive at Helen Mills Event Center. So let's do that real quick. We need to import it. We need to have it as a property inside of our delegate. And we will get this callback method on it. You can take a look at the header files. The actual event will tell you whether it was an arrival, whether it was a departure, and other information about the actual place that you've arrived at. We have some issues there because we didn't import place events or places, which we need both of them at this point. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is actually initialize that place connector. We're going to make sure that we have successfully enabled here, and then we're going to do that. And then the last step, the thing it's telling me about is, hey, I'm setting myself as a delegate, but I didn't specify that. So you end up with a QL place connector delegate being implemented here in the app delegate. So let's add that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my device in, and then we're going to run it on this device. And again, you're not going to see the device, you're going to see the console. Oh, did I? Thank you. That wouldn't have worked. Okay, yes, the actual file needs to be named user context plist. Obviously, I didn't type the name in. That's how we pick it up off the class path. Okay, so let's see here. Make sure that we have picked my device and that we're ready to run it. So the one thing we're actually going to see on the phone, and actually we're going to see an error here. We would not see an error if we were not running iOS 8. We're going to see an error because in iOS 8, if you're using location, they want you to define something called location always on description in your plist. So in your plist file, you're going to want to put this because it doesn't hurt to have it regardless of whether or not you're using iOS 8. And what this is going to do is provide a description to your user when they ask for location permissions about why you're using location. And I'm just going to say, you are going to love it, that's why. And the users will they'll love that. So we'll run it again. This time I'm not going to, I'm sorry, I am going to see something on my device that you're not going to see, but you've probably seen it before if you've ever used locations. It's asking the user whether they can use location in the app. So the user can either allow it or not allow it, and I'm going to allow it because I'm going to love it. And once that's enabled, okay, good. So location services are working great in Helen Mills event space. Maybe a little bit anticlimactic, no nice UI or anything, but we do see that we did get the place event. So if we jump back into the delegate and we look at when we got called back here, we say, hey, we did get a place event with the name of the place, and if we go back to our manager, the name of the place that we had was Helen Mills event space. So that's what we're seeing in the app right now. Okay, so that's geofencing, and that's working. That's how you get geofencing working. The last bit that we're going to do here, which is hopefully only going to take about 5 more minutes, is to enable the same app to be notified when I come into proximity to a beacon. So to start that out, we're going to go to the next quick start guide, which is under a separate section in the documentation. So proximity, iOS, and then quick start. This is meant to also stand on its own. So you'll find the first several sections of this document are just covering what we already did with geofencing. So we already created an account. We did the application. We pulled all the libraries in. They're exactly the same libraries. We verified target membership. Okay, so now we want to add proximity. Again, it's telling us create an application. We've already done that, and we have our credentials for proximity in the manager. So this next piece is for a deprecated feature, so we're going to skip over that. It's still in the document, but you can essentially ignore it. You can leave the default values in your application, and it will not affect it at all. Okay, so we're going to jump right back into the delegate. We're going to start importing and adding code to recognize beacons. So the first thing we need, and again, the projects that have merged, the proximity piece of it was initially called Fix, F-Y-X. That's why you're seeing that name on the screen right now. The next thing that we need to do is put the credentials in for proximity. So we're going to go right after geofencing. We're going to put our app ID, our app secret, and we're going to ignore that callback URL that we just talked about. So we jump back into the manager application. We pick up our iOS app, and we go to the proximity section, and we grab our app ID. And we'll grab our secret. Not a secret anymore. Okay. Next step, we're back in the document. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the service. This step right here, once this gets called, will actually start monitoring Bluetooth. And when we call that, we're going to want to know whether or not we've actually successfully started or not. There's another delegate for that, and there's a couple of methods we're going to get called back on. If the service starts successfully, we're going to get this service started called back. We do want to know that, because if we don't start successful, we're going to have to try it again later. This is what's going to tell us if that has happened, that the service start failed. In either case, we should get a message here. And then if the service has started successfully, we're going to start interacting with what we call the visit manager. So the visit manager is the actual piece where you're going to register your delegate, and then you're going to start getting callbacks about the actual proximity, the Bluetooth interaction. So hey, you just arrived at a beacon. I just sighted a beacon. That's what the visit manager is used for. So let's import our visit manager. Let's get rid of this for a second so we have some more space. We're going to add this guy as a property. Okay, so now we have a place connector. We have a visit manager. One's geofences, one's for proximity. Okay, we have to initialize the visit manager and set ourselves up with it as a delegate. And we are going to do that only if we're successful here. So we'll plug it in right there. It's telling us, hey, you need to be a delegate. Otherwise, we're not really going to call you back. So now we're going to be a visit delegate. Add that up here to the protocol. And two more imports. We want to know about the visit manager. We want to know, or actually it's just the transmitter. We already have the visit manager, so let's get rid of that guy. Okay, so the transmitter was the historical initial name for a beacon. They are synonymous. So the last step are the callbacks. We're actually going to be notified of some information about the beacon. So, okay, we're a visit manager now. We're a delegate of it. What arrive means is the very first time I get a signal from the Bluetooth beacon, I've arrived at it. So there will be a separate callback just to let you know. Because after that, every out of the box, 645 milliseconds, you're going to get this next callback, which is what we call a sighting. That sighting will give you the signal strength of the sighting, the time at which it happened. The last callback method is the departure, and what that means is, hey, I haven't seen it for some period of time. By default, in the foreground, it's 30 seconds. You also find that when you run your app and you actually have Bluetooth background mode enabled, the foreground, you'll see, I'd say 90% of your actual Bluetooth broadcasts, and in the background, you'll see significantly less. So we adjust the departure interval in the background so you're not arriving and departing constantly. Okay, so the last piece here is now to go into the manager, and we need to activate a beacon. We have with us a limited supply of these are the S10s that Sid showed you. I'm going to activate one of these S10s. We do have some, and we can hand them out if you grab us and you're interested before you leave. The activation process is simply click on the beacons tab, crack it open. There's special keys they make. They cost 25 cents. They're called a quarter, and they fit really good right in this little tab, and you twist it and it pops it open. Okay, so I'm going to call this my master beacon. And then when you do crack it open, inside there's what's called a factory ID, and you're going to need to put that code. It's on the little sticker here, which is sometimes a little hard to read, into the factory ID field in this. So That's mine. I've entered it in here before. Okay, the beacon's active. It's called master beacon. And now that's in the system. So we're going to go back into Xcode, going to run the application. And now what we should see when the application starts up is that the fix service successfully started. Now when I put a battery in the beacon, initially the beacon is in a programmable mode for the S10s for a very short period of time, as you see. But when you first put a battery in, it's in a programmable mode. There are some configuration settings that you can make to the beacon. That's all in the manager piece. You're seeing the callbacks at the bottom of the screen. I don't know if you noticed that or not. But we got the arrival. We're seeing a bunch of sightings. And then what we can do is I'll pop the battery while I explain the last bit. And after 30 seconds, you should see it tell us that we departed. What was I explaining here? Oh, the configuration piece. There are some configuration changes that you can make. And there we go. We just left the beacon. And we were around the beacon for about 30 seconds. There are some configuration changes that you can make, and there's an app on the App Store called the Gimbal Beacon Manager. And it allows you to change the configuration of the beacon. You change the configuration also in the manager, and then when you attach the Gimbal Manager to the beacon, when it's in programmable mode, it'll pull that configuration off and apply it. It makes it easier to apply mass configurations to beacons. Okay, so again, we're going to be here to answer questions. What time is it? 9:50. Actually, I have a couple minutes if we want to do any questions right now while I'm up here. Otherwise, you can grab Sid, I, or anyone else. The rest of the day will be around. But that concludes what I was up here to show you.
Why the core data? I saw core data was one of the frameworks.
We used it initially to persist. You'll notice V2 doesn't use it. We use it to persist some of the data that we persist inside the SDK. Like, hey, what beacons have we seen? Like, to track the visits, for instance, we persist data. So in that version, we were using core data to persist that data. Core data has been removed in the next version. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was why were we using core data in the SDK? And my answer was we were using it to persist some information that we use inside the SDK on the device. Yeah, I hope I didn't actually say anything about distance, because we try not to publish anything. So if you look up here, when you receive the sighting, and actually at the arrival as well, inside the visit, you still get the transmitter with the RSSI information. It's the signal strength that you can use, and it's very environment dependent. So we don't actually publish distances because of that. We could talk later, and I can give you an idea about different environments and about how far you are at what signal strengths. But again, you typically, if you want to be precise with it, you're going to have to do a site survey. You're going to have to do a site survey in the environment where you're deploying your beacon to see in that environment what's the signal strength.
Just to add to that, when you think of beacons and distances, think of hey, there's like the street 20 beacons, you can see them 150, 200 feet away straight line of sight. So the use cases are normally split as if there's a tap your phone to a certain location, or if it's a point of sale or anything. That use case very easy to do. 0 to 1 feet. That's if I want to coordinate that to a near immediate region. Then there's a region say 1 to 3 feet or 1 to 5 feet. That also is very clearly distinguishable based on RSSI. Then you get a region of say 5 to 30 feet and then greater than 30 feet. So those two are like sort of bigger regions where you can still say hey, someone's in presence of a beacon, but then it gets difficult to know are you 30 feet away or 25 feet away, 45 feet away, because the signal obviously diminishes as you go farther from the beacon. But you could still do use cases that if you just want to detect presence in a room, you can do that. Or if someone's within 3 or 5 feet from the beacon in a store, you could still do that. So think of there's some windows of distances that work well with taking of use cases. Sorry.
Since you're removing the MAC address, does it require having an internet connection?
Okay, so the question was, do we require an internet connection to resolve the beacon? So the answer to that is essentially yes. The beacon that's broadcasting the Gimbal packet does need to interact with our servers for the initial discovery of the beacon, because the code it changes over time. So you can't identify a beacon without talking to the platform to do the initial identification. So depending on your use case, you can configure the beacon to be static. So in use cases like that, you can configure them that way. So it's a security trade-off essentially. If you want to leverage the security aspect of the Gimbal beacons, you need a network on the initial resolution. If you don't need security or you can't use it, you can configure them to be static.
Yeah, so it really is use case dependent. We get that question asked a lot of times, and the question I ask back is, hey, using apps on a smartphone, most times 90% of an app are going to be smart if they have some data connectivity that connected to the internet. But yes, hey, in spaces like subway stations or even areas where hey, there's just no connectivity, that's a valid question. And so there are some workarounds. Sorry, I know this gentleman here had a question.
So
go ahead.
Go back.
You activated one beacon and it was like not a very tedious task, but still 1 or 2 minutes. Now imagine if I'm deploying this inside an AC store and I want to put this in each height so I can do very personalized promotions.
Yeah, I think I got your question. So let me repeat it. How do you bulk import beacons? There's actually 2 different ways to do it. One is through CSV format, which you can import here as a CSV file. The other one is a REST endpoint, which is in the documentation. And we can, again, if you have more detailed questions about those, we can go over them later, but for sure can you see that?
So, yeah, as Gary mentioned, you can actually, hey, manage all your beacons put them in a CSV file, upload them. Later on, you wanted to add some more, update them, update the CSV file, re-upload it, and you can just do that way, or there's REST endpoints to do that.
We're going to go back and forth.
Yeah.
You're next. Go ahead.
Your geofence solution, does it have to go through the manager portal? Right? Can you just input your laptop to the manager?
So I mean, part of the value. Sorry, well, the question was, do we have to go to the portal to specify the regions on the device? I mean, part of the value add is cross-platform and being able to add them without adjusting your application code itself. So we're dynamically grabbing them off the server and adjusting what you're monitoring for. So, of course, as a developer, you could specify regions yourself in the application. If you want to use Gimbal's geofencing and kind of leverage what I just described, you have to do it through the manager. The user is setting up the geofence? Yeah, again, I covered a very small set of the features. We have something in the SDK called private places. And if you look through the API documentation, you'll see them. And so that's exactly that scenario, is the user wants to create the place, not the owner of the application. And that's what that supports what you just described. Yeah. So sorry, we're going to jump back over here. You were next.
I actually have 2 questions. One, in case of geofencing, do you see any major impact on the device for the device? And the second question, in case of beacons, do you see any challenges related to beacon security, beacon itself?
Can you repeat the second part about the beacons?
In case of beacons, did you see any security challenges related to beacon itself, because the beacon has a device? Because I can come close to the beacon and change some properties.
Sure. So the question was, there's 2 questions. One is a question on geofence and hey, how much battery life that is to devices. And the second question is on beacon security. Is hey, have we seen instances of someone trying to reprogram a beacon or just do anything else to a beacon? So on geofencing, good question, comes up a lot. We have done, we have a bunch of algorithms in the SDK, and I'm not going to speak to very specifics of it. And hey, when you're doing location services, geolocation, sure, there is battery usage. Difficult to publish numbers because literally every smartphone is different from each other in terms of usage. Or we look at holistically. Obviously, hey, we have a bunch of apps live, so we look at, hey, is the usage where a user is going to don't want user deleting apps. So we've done extensive testing to like, hey, your device is still going to go through the whole day. The SDK is only going to run certain things when there's some smart, as I said, algorithms around it. Sorry if I'm being very generic. We're happy to answer more specific questions one-on-one, but we have put things in there so the SDK is taking care of the fact that, hey, it's not just, SDK is not constantly running it's not like a Maps app or it's not like a navigation app, so it's not constantly running in the background, pulling fresh location. There's a combination of things we do where, hey, there might be some existing location fix available on the OS because some other app pulled it. We'll utilize that, so we do a combination of things there.
Yeah, real quick, one concrete thing I can say is that I carry my phone around running a bunch of Gimbal apps on it all day, and it lasts a day. I mean, again, like Sid was saying, we don't publish any numbers because, again, it's environment specific. I noticed that I drain more battery based on location services in New York than I do at home. So again, that's why it's hard to come up with those numbers, but we've worked for years trying to make it as efficient as possible. And actually, there's been changes in the platforms which have forced us to make changes based on the actual platforms we're running on themselves, and we are constantly doing that. So sorry, we can't be more specific than that. And then
Sorry.
for the security on the beacon programming piece, that's part of why we go back to the server before you can program a beacon. I mean, we ensure that you own that beacon before you can reprogram it. No one else will be able to attach to and reprogram your beacon unless you have the credentials for that organization.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered that question, and I think we're getting the cane here.
Yeah.
Because it's 10 o'clock. So again, we're going to be here all day.
Yeah. We'll take questions at the back.
Yep.
We have a 1 o'clock session. The focus there is we're actually going to spend lesser time. We'll keep more time for Q&A because, hey, hopefully you'll have a chance even during lunch to look around the SDK or just have more questions that'll come up. We're happy to answer questions at the back, and 1 o'clock session we'll keep more time for just Q&A. So, thank you, Gary.